Hello and welcome to this video which deals with the first part of Lesson 4, Thomas Egenes' Introduction to Sanskrit. In this lesson we'll be dealing with the new Devanagari letters introduced on page 32 and the grammar and vocabulary introduced at pages 33 to 35 of the printed book. So starting now with the new letters of the Devanagari alphabet, you'll see on page 32 there are two vargas there, two rows, all within the same category. Remember this word varga, which is a category formed from a particular point of articulation. The ka varga, the ka group, is the letters all formed with the tongue touching the towards the back, the soft palates of the ka, k, g, g, ng. Those are all that's the ka varga. Here we'll be dealing with the ta varga, the ta group, and the ta varga. And it's vitally important to distinguish, of course, between retroflex and dental. The retroflex ta and the dental ta. So I'll share screen with you now. There we are. So looking now at the ta varga, the ta is written like this, and it resembles something like one of these hooks that you screw, like a downward hanging hook. And the retroflexes we do with a dot underneath. We transliterate with a dot underneath. The ta, the aspirated form of that, is the same, save that you continue the line to complete a circle. Note that important distinction there. So this is the retroflex ta. Now the da you may remember when we did the ka varga, the letter ng, which in Devanagari is written like this, is the same as the da, save that the ng has a dot to the right of it. And remember, of course, that dot is an integral part of the letter. So that's the one that we write with the dot above, or sometimes with a line above that. That's ng. So the only distinction between the da and the ng is that dot written to the right of the ng. Now da, which is the aspirated form of the voiced retroflex, the da, you start off writing it like a da, but instead of completing the circle as we did in the ta, that's the da, complete the circle in the ta, in the da, you start writing like the da, but then you curl round, and that makes the da. The ta, ta, da, da. Now the n, you'll see it written here like at the letter r, but with two downstrokes following. That is an n. Note the distinction in transliteration. An n with a dot above it is the ng, and an n with a dot underneath it is the n. And it helps to remember that all of these retroflexes, the da, ta, da, da, na, and also the vocalic r, all written with a dot underneath the letter. Now this shape of the retroflex n, in printed texts you will very often see it written like that, but you'll often see it like a r, like the letter r, followed by two downstrokes. You will very often see it written like this, as a loop coming down and back up. They are exactly the same letter, it's purely a distinction in style. In handwriting, it's more common to see this loop there. And you see it's easier to write as well. 1, 2, 3. Whereas the handwritten form, n, like that. We now go on to the dentals, called dental because the tongue is against the ridge at the back of the teeth. So rather than the retroflex bent back, the tongue bent back to touch the hard palate, da. Here it's a da, da, and sometimes you can see the tongue just protruding through the teeth, da. So this is the letter da, ta, written with a hook at the top. Notice that the letter ta is one of those ones that, so to speak, is open-topped. You see it, for example, in m, which is distinguished from b. The only distinction, only visual distinction, between those is the open top. So that is m, and that is b. And there's also the distinction between g, with a closed top, just an unbroken bar across the top, and the, which is sometimes written like that, and sometimes written like that. That's the. This t is typically written with the crossbar not going the whole way across the top, but just a short one over the upright like that. There's no corresponding closed top one to that. That's just on its own as it is. Now the dental da. Now you've got to be careful to put this little wiggle at the end of it. If you don't, if you just write it like that, it comes out the same as a da, which it's not. It's basically the same shape, but you get a little hook down, curl round and down. That is the da. And that is the way that you distinguish between those two letters. So this little curly bit at the bottom, I'll write it again slowly. That. This curly bit at the bottom is not an optional flourish. It's an essential part of the letter, and it's what distinguishes the from the da. 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 Now, da, we've already just been discussing. It can be written one of two ways. Either the way it's written in the printed book with a curl, and then like a kind of backwards 3 with a curl on the top, and the upright with a short crossbar. But remember, the d is always open-topped. If you write it with a closed top, it becomes a g. That's a g. So, d written in one of two ways. Purely a matter of style. You'll see both in printed books. You'll see both in handwriting. Makes no difference. That's the other way of writing a d. A d. But if you write with a closed top, it becomes a g. So that open top there, that's the important distinction between the d and the g. And the n is the simplest of letters. It's just that short line with a hook at the end. Some people, if you wrote that, it's not quite right, but people would understand exactly what you mean. It's correct. You always see either a little bauble there. Or some people, write it with a hook like that. In some slightly decorative, even printed scripts, you'll see, quite a big circle there going like that. The important thing is it's the horizontal bar that joins to the upright with a little circle or a big circle or a little bauble. So like that, or bigger bauble, or tiny little circle, or or in a big circle, as I say, in the decorative scripts. All of them are this n. How you write it for yourselves is a matter of your own style of handwriting. Myself, I just tend to do something like that. It's my normal way of writing it. Now, at the bottom of page 32, we see these two additional consonants, the l and the aspirated l. These two consonants do not appear in classical Sanskrit. You will find them only in Vedic, and you will also find them in Pali. In Vedic, where you get the letter d, where it occurs intervocalically, that is to say with a vowel on either side of it, the d becomes a l, a retroflex l. So in the opening words of the Rig Veda, Agnimile, Agnim, it's the fire or the god of fire, put in the accusative because it's the object of the verb ile, I worship. Ile, I worship. If you were saying that in pure Sanskrit and ignoring the Vedic, nobody would ever say it now, because the correct way to recite it is Vedic Agnimile with a retroflex l. But if that were being recited as pure Sanskrit, that ile would be ide. And the normal l is written like that. The retroflex l is written like an 8 on its side. Sorry, I muffed that up a bit. An 8 on its side. And then like that. It reminds you slightly of the letter k, which is like an 8 on its side, but that has the crossbar going down the middle. So that's the k. That's the l. So ile, written in Vedic, would be written like this. The ile, ile. Where the d is aspirated to become a d, that's this one, retroflex, voiced, aspirated d. Just as where the d, when it occurs between two vowels, in Vedic becomes a l, and so the aspirated d between two vowels becomes a l. It's the retroflex vocalic l turned into a consonant, and then retroflex l turned into a consonant and aspirated. In the entire Devanagari alphabet, there are entirely separate symbols, separate letters for the aspirated and the non-aspirated, as you'll just have seen. And that is a t, and that is a t, and so on. This l is the only consonant where for the aspiration they just write the letter h after it. It's very rare. It's hardly even worth introducing to a course for you, but for those who are looking for Buddhist Sanskrit, but I do for the sake of completeness. So it's l, and with the h written immediately afterwards, and just with a line across the top. For those of you who will be studying Pali, in using the Devanagari script, you will see that letter. There is, for example, the Sanskrit dridha, meaning firm, standing firm, just standing firm against adversity, firm in your practice, dridha. In Pali, and I'm talking about Pali now simply for the sake of completeness about the script, in Pali, this becomes a dalha. Firstly, because Pali doesn't have a r, it becomes another vowel here in this particular word, a. It becomes dalha, written with it's a retroflex aspirated l, dalha. And it would be written in Devanagari like this. So it's the palatal d, the retroflex l, with the h immediately joining. So that is dalha as a Pali word. We now move on to the grammar on page 33 of the printed book. And I read from the book. Sanskrit nouns are formed in a similar way to verbs. The root dhatu forms a stem, the pratipadika. And the endings, this sup you see here, S-U-P, that's the Paninian code word for the nominals, the endings of nominals. And I say nominals instead rather than nouns, because nominals include nouns and the range of other words that decline in a broadly similar manner to nouns, and to which many of these same considerations apply. So nouns and adjectives, there's no formal distinction, or hardly any formal distinction between them in Sanskrit. They will decline in the same way. But also pronouns, they don't decline in exactly the same way as nouns, but a lot of the same considerations apply to pronouns, and they have the 7 cases, and they have the nominative, accusative, instrumental, and so on, exactly like nouns do. Some of the case endings are the same as nouns, others are not, but mostly for the grammar of numerals, the same pronouns rather, the same considerations apply, and they apply equally. Again, the declensions are slightly different to numerals. So nouns, adjectives, pronouns, numerals, they exhibit different behaviors in declension, but they are called nominals because they belong, as it were, in the same basket, because most of the things that you can say about the grammar and declension of nouns applies also to the grammar and declension, or mostly to the grammar and declension of adjectives, and in large measure to the grammar and declension of pronouns and numerals. So that's why we say nominals to encompass that entire group. So it says in the book, the endings, the Paninian code word sup, meaning the endings, are added to form a noun, which is the subanta. Subanta just means ending in sup. Sup, end, means ending in sup. So read here, instead of the endings are added to form nouns, no, added to form pronouns and numerals as well, and adjectives. So nouns are in various cases, and in Sanskrit the case is called the vibhakti, which just means a division. You divide it into the different cases. Vibhakti is a feminine word in Sanskrit, and that is why the Sanskrit names for the cases are actually feminine adjectives. So pratama, the short ah means first, but feminine pratama, meaning first vibhakti, pratama vibhakti. And equally second is dvitiya, but in the feminine form is dvitiya. So the dvitiya vibhakti, literally second division, is what we call the accusative. So it says here then, looking at paragraph 2, we will learn 2 cases. The nominative, pratama, is used for naming the subject, as in Rama goes. The nominative is also used for a predicate nominative identified with the subject. What that means is Rama is the king. Gautama is the Buddha. so-and-so is my teacher. So if you're saying A is B, such and such a person is so-and-so, then the predicate, what you're saying about that person, will equally be in the nominative case. You're saying A equals B. So in India, words are normally cited independently in the nominative, which is the naming case. Well, okay, that's often true. When we are simply talking about a word in isolation, we will tend to use the stem form. That's the stem before any distinctive grammatical endings are added to it. So, for example, if we're talking about, as a matter of grammar, talk about the word Buddha, we would just talk about the word Buddha like that, which is the stem form before you've altered it by making it nominative, accusative, instrumental, or so on. Now, looking at the accusative is the direct object. You do something, to something else. So the direct object. It's also an accusative, what we say, the accusative of motion. If you're motion towards something, we'll tend to take the accusative. Same as in, for example, Latin and German. The accusative of motion. In German, the range of prepositions which indicate either position in something or motion towards. The position in something will tend to take a dative, but the motion towards will take an accusative. In Latin, using to go to Rome, Romam ire, putting in the accusative. In Sanskrit and Pali, it's the same. If you're going to the city, just going city, but putting the word city, or if you're going in the accusative. So grama means a village. Gramang gacchati, you put the village in the accusative, mean he goes to the village. Gramang gacchati. So looking at paragraph 3 now, the sentence, the man goes to the horse. The word man would be in the nominative because is the person doing the act. And the word horse would be in the accusative. So the man goes to the horse. So in paragraph 4, we see the formation of masculine nouns whose stems end in a. That's the short a, by the way. Just to remind you, in transliteration, when you see a vowel written without any marker, by convention that represents the short form of the vowel. So a, I, u. And if you want to make it long, it goes a, I, u, putting a stroke over the top, which we call the macron. Nothing to do with the president of France. This one is from the Greek macron, simply meaning big or large. So you enlarge the vowel, lengthen it, by putting the macron over it. And just further on transliteration here, if you, in order to make a contrast, want to emphasize that a vowel is short, you can put what's known as the micron. Obviously macron and micron. Micron just as in microwave. Micron is small, so you're making the vowel small. So just to emphasize that, say I'm emphasizing the difference between a and a, I can just to point out that I really am talking about a short. Sorry, I haven't written it very well there. I'll write it better. Here we are. Like that. I. And you will sometimes see that in grammars and textbooks, for example, where a word can have either a short or a long vowel. For example, we can have the word bhava, meaning being, also bhava, being or a state. You can have bhava or bhava, and you will sometimes see that, particularly in grammar books when they're discussing the word and the formation of words. You might see it written like this, with a macron and a micron, both. Where you see that written, that's an indication, grammarians use it to indicate that that a can be either short or long. Bhava, bhava. That's all it means. So here we're looking at the formation of masculine nouns whose stems end in a. Looking at the first line of paragraph 4 here on page 33. Look at the way these are formed now. So the nominative is narah. Narah. Pronounced in isolation, you will often hear it said naraha, with the echo of the vowel following the naraha. In ancient times, it was more likely to have been pronounced narah. The dual is narau, nominative. And the nominative plural is the same as the nominative singular, but with the lengthening of the a. So it's narah. Narah. So look at the nominative of Buddha. Buddha. And all the Buddhas. Sarve, by the way, we'll come to this later. Sarve is the nominative plural of sarva. It is a nominative plural, I promise you. I'll show you why in another lesson. Sarve Buddha. So the long ah. Sarve Buddha. And in Pali we have sabbe satta sukhita hontu. May all beings be happy. Now I'm on it, I'll do it for you in Pali and Sanskrit. So Pali, sabbe, satta, sukhita, hontu. Sanskrit, sarve. So it's sarve avi. Sattva, plural, you see. Sarve sattva. Sukhita. Hontu is actually a phonetic variation of bhavantu, may they be. May all beings be happy. Those of you who've read a bit further will say, the sukhita, this visarga, this H at the end of sukhita ought to be dropped. Correct, it should, because it's followed by a long ah, followed by a voiced consonant. One of the rules of Santi, it drops that ah, drops that visarga. So sarve sattva sukhita bhavantu. Now, from narah, narau, narah, let's now look at the accusative. Accusative, naram. Accusative for the dual, narau. Notice that in the dual number, the nominative and the accusative are always the same. This applies throughout all the declensions. They just are. You do not distinguish in the dual between nominative and accusative. Whereas in the singular and the plural, you do distinguish. So the accusative plural, the visarga narah changes to an N, naran. Naran. When you're reciting declensional tables in Sanskrit, you traditionally go across the line rather than down. So you don't do singular, nominative, accusative, instrumental, and so on, then dual. You go across. So you do nominative, singular, dual, plural, then accusative, singular, dual, plural. That's how it's traditionally done, and it's how we'll do it here. So if you were reciting this declensional table, you go naraha, narau, naraha, naram, narau, naran. Now we've got a note at the bottom here of page 33. Nara is formed by nara plus s. So nara plus s. And the s changes to an h because of santi. Okay. In the Indo-European languages, and we notice this in Sanskrit, and we notice it also in Greek, right up to modern Greek, and in Latin, but no longer in Italian, indeed any of the languages, any of the modern languages that derive from Latin, that the S, the letter S, is the characteristic ending of the masculine nominative singular. And so it was in Vedic, pre-Vedic, but already by the time of the Vedas, whenever that S appeared at the end of a word, it was never pronounced as a full S. It became a visarga. So in very primitive times, before the Vedas were even composed, the word man would have been naras, and the Buddha would have been buddhas. But as time went on, that final S became a visarga. So instead of naras, came an expulsion breath, narah. And you see the same happening, for example, in southern Spain. And there's the typical Andalusian pronunciation. For instance, how are you? The polite form is como in regular Spanish, Castellano, is como está usted, como está usted. But that S, either at the end of a word or before a consonant, becomes softened to an H. So in Andalusia, you'd hear them say, como está usted? And in the plural, como están ustedes? Not como están ustedes, como están ustedes? And I remember hearing the Prime Minister of Spain in an interview a while ago saying, until the year 2000, which in regular Spanish, he would say, hasta los 2000, hasta los 2000, with the S fully pronounced. He said, hasta los 2000, hasta los 2000. So we see the same kind of phenomenon occurring, but this time officially, not as dialect, in Vedic and Sanskrit. So the S becomes an H, or a subdotted H as we call it, the visarga. Visarga just means expulsion and emission of breath. Visarga, letting it out. Ah, narah. It also becomes a subdotted H, visarga, before a voiced consonant of the ka varga and the pa varga. However, notice that that final S reverts to being a full S if it's followed by a dental. And as I've told you before, this is a rule you all know already, maybe without knowing that you know it. The word namah, from the root nam, meaning to bend, and therefore to bow, deferentially or respectfully, nam. And the verbal noun of that, formed by adding an as, then becomes, if the word is used in isolation, namah. But if it's homage to thee, namah plus te, the H reverts to being a subdotted H, the visarga reverts to being an S, which is why we say namaste, a bow te to thee, a bow to thee, namaste. We now go over to page 34. So paragraph 5 now at the top of page 34. The verb and subject must agree in number in both English and Sanskrit. For example, if the subject is singular, then the verb must also be singular. The examples are given: the man goes to the horse, and the men go to the horse. Paragraph 6, the direct object need not agree with either the subject or verb. Well, that actually is not a correct way of putting it. The direct object never agrees with subject or verb. The subject and the verb must agree, but the direct object can be anything. There is no agreement there. To number 7, a noun in apposition, such as Rama, the boy, and Caesar, Emperor of Rome, Buddha, the enlightened one. That's where you're saying the name or description of a person or thing and adding something else, which is in direct, what's called in apposition to it. In other words, an additional material saying what it is, and that always goes in the same case. So, for example, we are studying Sanskrit, the language of ancient India. So we are studying Sanskrit, that goes in the accusative, and the language of ancient India, that is an apposition. It's just further words adding to the description of what you've just said. And we are students of the teachings of the Buddha, the enlightened one. So of the Buddha, the enlightened one. The enlightened one also have to, both of these would be in the genitive, because the Buddha, the enlightened one, is in apposition. In other words, a phrase following on, completing or adding further words to what's just been said. So the normal word order, subject, direct, object, verb, that's the normal word order in Sanskrit and Pali. It's often departed from, but it would be departed from mostly just to emphasize one or the other. If there's no particular emphasis on any word there, subject, object, or verb, they would go in this normal order. So narah ashvam gacchati, the man to the horse, that's the accusative of motion, the man goes to the horse. And with sandhi, naroshvam or naroshvam gacchati. So narah, ending in an ah, is the nominative case. Now, to write that sentence without sandhi, that's writing the words in isolation. Narah, the man, ashwam, that's just an ashwam, gacchati, the man goes to the horse. Now, where you get an ah followed by a short ah, they coalesce into an o, naroshvam. Naro, we often put an apostrophe there. And the final M, because it's followed by a consonant, becomes anuswara, naroshvam gacchati. And in the Devanagari script, this loss of the a here, called the avagraha, which literally means taking out. Avagraha is cognate with English off-grabbing, it's grabbed off. So it would look like this in Devanagari. Naro. And then this sign, like an S, is used to represent the loss of that a. Naroshvam, this is sh with a v. So the sh joined with a w is actually written like that. Boom, boom, that's a shva. So naroshvam and then gacchati written normally. So this sign here, like an S, represents the lost a in ashvam, narah ashvam, naroshvam gacchati. Now on to page 35, we'll look through the vocabulary. Ashwa, meaning a horse. The etymology of this is quite fun. It often happens that my Pali students will well know this, where you get a sh in Sanskrit, that often becomes a k in Greek, or a k or a qua in Latin. So, for example, ashva, this word here, ashva, means a horse, and it's cognate with the Latin word equus, where we have equestrian, equine, to do with horses. There are numerous words like that. For example, you get the root nash, meaning to destroy or to damage. In classical Greek, it is a nosos, meaning a disease, nosology, the study of disease. In Latin, it becomes that nash is knock, and that has come into English in words such as noxious, causing harm, and innocent. Innocens, innocent means you haven't caused harm, you've done no wrong. Innocens, you haven't caused a nasha, haven't caused knock. We'll see numerous ones like this as we go along. Gajah, an elephant. Narah, man. Putra, son. Mriga is a deer. Rama is Rama, the name Rama. And va is an indeclinable, means or, and like cha, it's an enclitic. That means it never comes at the beginning of the sentence, and it follows the word that it modifies. So it says here, nouns will be cited in the nominative case. Traditionally, that's how it's used for citing words independently, as we've seen among Western scholars, and I think also in India to a very great extent. You'll see the stem form of the word is cited rather than the nominative form. It doesn't matter which one you do. We'll stick to citing the stem form, which is the standard Western scholars' way of doing it. Nouns as well as verbs may be connected with cha and va. When two nominatives are connected with va, the verb agrees with the nominative closest to it. So, you say the horse, singular, or the elephants go, which without sandhi would be ashva, singular, gajahva, or the elephants, and Sanskrit we say elephants or, gajahva, gachanti, and the gachanti is in the plural, because it's closest to the word gajah, which is plural. If it were the other way round, you would say, if you were going to say the elephants or the horse goes, because the horse now is in the singular and it's closest to the verb would go in the singular. So you would say, again without sandhi, gajah ashva va gachati. Gachati goes in the singular because the closest noun is singular. And applying sandhi to this, I'll write it first without sandhi. So that's ashvaha, ashva, gajahva, gachanti. This now becomes the ah before a voiced consonant becomes o, so it becomes ashvo. Now we have here ah, the long ah, followed by visarga, followed by a voiced consonant. What happens here is just the visarga disappears. So it becomes Ashvu Gajava, and then Gachanti remains the same. These are among the most common instances of Sandhi. So the ah before voice consonant becomes O, and ah becomes ah before any voiced consonant. So at the bottom of page 35, he goes gacchati, the man he goes, narah gacchati, with Sandhi, naro gacchati. The Buddha speaks. You wouldn't say Buddha vadati, it's Buddho vadati. However, when there is a subject, the he is dropped. Well, that's just a matter of English grammar. Nara gacchati, with Sandhi, naro gacchati, the man goes. So that brings us to the end of lesson 4a, and in the next one, 4b, we will be doing the exercises at pages 36 to 39, and finally the summary sheet on page 40. So that's all on this video.